31, 1994, and Mom's visiting here in Arizona. Hold on. Home with Mayre, John, Michael, and we saw Notre Dame. So, Mom, can you sing us the Notre Dame fight song, all that you know of it?
Oh, I don't really remember
Three
the words.
cheers.
3 cheers for old Notre Dame. Send out the echoes, I know the flames. I don't know. Send somebody out for gin. Don't let a sober person in. We never stagger, we never fall. We sober up on wood alcohol. That's all I remember. I can't think the rest. And you know, my voice is gone, and I've never been so sick in all my life.
Well,
but
tell us a little bit about, let's start with what your mother and father were like.
They were wonderful, wonderful people. They helped everybody, and they were very kind.
Where were they from?
My mother was from Newfoundland.
Where in Newfoundland?
I can't even think.
Bonavista Bay?
Bonavista Bay, and my father was from the River Bourgeois in Nova Scotia. And my mother lived right down on the water, beautiful little spot. And her mother had a stroke when she was quite young. And my mother used to put her in the wheelbarrow and wheel her up over the hill. It was quite a hill. She had to take her up and take her to visit all her friends, because they lived way out in the country and they didn't have cars then. And my father lived in Nova Scotia. The River Bourgeois was very pretty, and I never did get to meet his mother or father, but my mother used to write to them all the time. And he had a brother named Henry, and he used to write all the time, and Charlie. And Uncle Dan, we saw him all the time because he was in this country and he went on the fishing boats. And every time his boat would come in, he'd come over to the house and he always chewed sense-ins, I remember that, and always kissed us on the forehead or on the head. He liked his little drop though, you know. And I guess he came into the country illegally. Somehow or other he didn't pay taxes, and so he was deported. And all the while he lived at home, he never married. I don't think he ever married. I think when he went back down to Nova Scotia, maybe he married this woman, or it was his housekeeper or something. I don't know, but when I went down, we saw his grave and saw where they lived. And my father's sister, Aunt Helen, lived around there, and she was a fine lady, but she had diabetes, and my father had diabetes, and I have it, and my brother Reggie had it. And what
Tell me
else
about
can
your
I
mother.
say?
How many kids in her family?
My mother had, heaven's sakes, she had Tom and Jim. Tom died when he was quite young. And Jim and Celia and Rita and Aunt Bessie. 5, and Uncle Pat. 6, I guess.
Okay. And so tell us about them when you were young. Let's hear your story. So you were a thriving baby, and then what happened?
I was 18 months old, and my mother went in the crib to pick me up, and I was lifeless. My hands flopped, my head flopped, and anyhow she rushed me to the hospital, and I had polio. And so it was just one operation right after the other, and running me back and forth, you know, for
Tell
physical
about they used
therapy.
to have to go in with your dressed in the garb.
Oh,
Tell
that
about
was,
what
yeah.
kind of treatments you got.
Well, the first thing I remember was putting me about, it was a big round thing like this with all kind of heavy bulbs in there, heavy watt bulbs or something, and I used to have to sit under that. And then I wore a brace, and my doctor was Dr. Legg, who was the doctor that later discovered Legg-Perthes disease. And I never liked him. He was kind of an old pill. When he put on my brace, he wasn't very gentle, and sometimes the little things would prick me. But anyhow, that was at the Children's Hospital in Boston. And when I suppose I must have been I remember I was in the 4th grade, so I don't remember how old it was. But anyhow, my mother heard of a doctor, Dr. Lee, down in New Bedford, that would operate on me and take away my brace. So, of course, I was for all that because the doctor told me I could wear pretty shoes and everything. So, my mother had me operated on, and we were in a ward, isolation ward, and every time my mother and father came to see me, there was a pan of water down in front of my bed and all that, and they'd have to wash their hands and put on the mask and put on a little hat and put on a robe or something before they could come in to see me. And so anyhow, I had the operation, and I had to have a board across the top of my bed, or crib was like, and at nighttime sometimes I used to sneak my leg down out of that, and oh, that was the best feeling. And I had a good time at that hospital, even though I, was away from my folks. They could only come see me on a Saturday and Sunday. But and people used to go by the window and look in, and I'd wave to them all. And then sometimes they'd bring me gifts, pocketbooks and balloons and color pads, coloring books and things like that. And I remember when I was going to get operated on, we had this doctor, his name was Dr. Shuknicki. And before I went to the operation, the girl said, kiss the girl in the ward you like the best. And he was coming to kiss me, and I was sitting on the bedpan, so I had to tell him, no, stay away. But anyhow, he eventually came back when I was off the bedpan. And then he was it must have been the anesthesiologist too or something, because I remember being in the operating room, and he put this clamp thing over my face, and I said, Dr. Shuknicki, don't do that, And he took it off, and I held it away a little bit until I went to sleep. And so the operation, was good. And then after that operation, I had to go to a place in Fairhaven, and gosh, I can't even think of the name of it right
How
this
many
minute.
operations did you have it on?
Oh, I guess about 12.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a Solomar. It was a Sun Hospital. And I had a cast in my leg there, and they had a little horseshoe on the cast so I could walk around sometime. But we were able to go swimming, and I'd have to sit in the water and hold my leg up so the cast wouldn't fall in, but it did one time. And at night, I slept on the porch, and I could see the flickering lights of the automobiles, and I used to count them to go to sleep.
And then didn't you say you liked olives?
Oh, yeah, when I was at Solomar, my mother used to come and, I couldn't get out of the crib or anything, and I loved olives, those stuffed olives, and my mother bring them, and we'd throw them at one another, because we couldn't pass them around. We all had our own little cubicles, so we'd toss them around. But I went to school there, too, and they used to wheel the beds, right down to the classroom. And, the big thrill of it was when I got a little better, I could ring the bell for the kids to get their juice after school. And, even though I was in the hospital, I had a pretty good time. My mother used to, and father encouraged me to look out the windows and watch the birds and smell the grass when they were mowing it and all that sort of stuff, And I was always very happy.
What they call
I'd lead the kids.
Time and stuff. We're going to skip around now and go from Mom's childhood. We'll come back to it, but go from Mom's child. Oh, say the Alfred Paulin.
Oh, character. Mm-hmm.
Okay, say that, and then we'll go.
Okay, this is something that I used to raise my children by. It's called Character by Albert N. Parlin. I would have all young persons taught to respect themselves, their citizenship, the rights of others, and all sacred things, to be neat in person and in habit, clean in thought and in speech, modest in manner, cheerful in spirit, and masters of themselves, faithful to every trust, loyal to every duty, magnanimous in judgment, and sympathetic toward the needy and unfortunate. For this is not only the way to wisdom, happiness, and true success, but the way to make the most of oneself and to be of greater service to the world. I
Yeah.
think that is wonderful.
It is.
And my voice is terrible. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, simply because of the time element, I know that Mayre in later times would like to hear about what happened when I was a little baby, and so, like how you wanted to have children, how long you were married before you had children, and all that kind of good stuff. What you thought about when you were thinking about me, that you'd asked for a redhead.
Oh, my goodness gracious. I have to recall all this in a few minutes. Well, I wanted to have children, and nothing happened. I almost adopted a few times, but then I thought, well, we better wait. But I went to a lot of clinics, fertility clinics, and I had my tubes blown, and they said there was nothing wrong with me, just a matter of time. And we were living in Millington, Tennessee, and I went to this fertility clinic there at the Naval Hospital, and the doctor says, "Oh, don't worry," he said, "we'll get you pregnant." He said, people that haven't had children in years and years come here and we get them pregnant. So anyhow, I went through that, and then in the meantime, we had to go to Fort Worth for temporary duty, supposedly 30 days. And anyhow, I discovered that I was pregnant, and we stayed in Fort Worth, and I never did get a chance to go back and tell that doctor, how wonderful it was. He told me different things to do. I don't want to say all that on here, And, but anyhow, I had Wayne, and then I wanted to have another baby right away, and the doctor says, "Oh, you better wait, because you've been through a lot, and to have him." So I wanted to have a little redhead. So this friend of mine gave me a picture of a little redheaded girl. It was from Johnson & Johnson or something like that. And I put that on the wall up down the foot of my bed. And every night I used to look at it, when I was pregnant, and say I wanted a little redheaded girl. And sure enough, when Maureen came along, I had her. And but while I was, I had a cesarean. All my children were born cesarean birth. And when I was having Maureen, the doctor accidentally cut my bladder, and I didn't know it at the time. But I was so sick that I couldn't, take care of her at all. The nurse used to have to come in and sit by my bed and feed Maureen the bottle. And I just kept having one blood transfusion after the other. And they wanted Paul to give me blood, and they couldn't find him, so a lot of his friends came. He was going to school or something, and a lot of his friends came and gave me blood. And everybody used to walk by my bed and say, "Oh, if I had to go through what you're going through, I'd never have another baby." And of course, we wanted to have quite a few children. But when I had Wayne, the doctor says, if I have anything to do with it, this is going to be your last child. Here, do you want to sit up here with me?
Give Banoy a little kiss and then go on.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna. I love this little girl. She's the joy of my life. And Maureen did such a good job going over and picking her out. I couldn't have done better myself. You remember when your mother went and picked you out?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. And So anyhow, he said that that would be all. I could have one more and that would be the end after I had Wayne. So then, of course, we had Maureen, and I wanted to have another one. And
More about Maureen, why you named her her name and
oh,
all
Maureen, yeah, I called her Maureen G Mulvaney because I told her she was my big production. I went through an awful lot having her. And
what did the nurses say about me?
oh yeah, and when she was born, she was so beautiful that it was very embarrassing because they all said they never saw such a beautiful baby. And she had real blonde hair, and it was all in little ringlets all over her head. Oh, she was beautiful. And it was very embarrassing because here all these other people with their babies, and they were going on about Maureen, and the day I was going to go home, why, they all took her. I was so weak I couldn't do anything. And they took her and they wanted to dress her and everything, you know. And
Every time they took my diaper off.
oh, that was when I got home. Every time we changed her diaper, she used to do like the hula, you know. She'd jiggle around there and do a little dance, it seemed like. That was after we had the accident.
Oh.
You know, when you're about 6 months old, you used to do that.
Oh.
And anyhow, when Maureen and Wayne, let's see, Wayne was 2, Maureen was about 6 months old. We were driving from San Diego to Portsmouth, or to Boston, and Paul was on his way to Korea, so he hired this young fellow that was going to get transferred to Portsmouth, Virginia, to drive us home. And on the way, we had this big accident in Clarksville, Tennessee. We had a flat tire. We were pulling a trailer with a washing machine and all that stuff in it, and the carriages and bikes. And this car came around. It had been raining. We had a flat tire, so we stopped and fixed that. And then we got going again. We were wide awake. And this car came around the bend in Clarksville. A truck. It was a truck loaded with fruit. And he crashed into us. And we went into the side of a hill. And somehow or other, the overhead lights went on in the car. And I looked for Maureen, and I couldn't find her. Finally, I found her. She started to cry, and it was music in my ears. She had been in a car bed in the back seat, and she was under the steering wheel in the front seat. And Wayne was crying because all the suitcases toppled on him, and somebody had made him a beautiful plane, and that got smashed. And I went through the windshield, and I looked out, and my hawk was laying out on the ground, and his arm looked like it was all icicles sticking out of his elbow, all the bones. Shall I go on and tell all this? And so I said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And the truck driver came up and he said, are you hurt? And I said, we're all hurt, call the ambulance. And he went off, and that's all I ever saw of him. And my hawk, who was a pharmacist mate at the time, said, oh, you better, pull me up the hill. We crashed into the side of the hill. And I said, well, how am I going to get you up there? And he said, well, you grab my arm and I'll push with my foot. And I finally got him up the top of the hill after I slipped and slid all over the place. And then he said that he had to have his feet elevated. Oh, first of all, he told me to tie a tourniquet on him to stop the bleeding. I got one of Maureen's diapers. I slid down and got that. And he showed me how to tie the tourniquet. And then I had to slide down and get the suitcase. And I put his feet up. And finally, the police came, but no ambulance. And so I told the police to call the ambulance. And they did. And they didn't question me at all or do anything until we were going to get in the ambulance. And they said, well, how many people and who's hurt and all this? And I said, you'll have to wait and get that information later. They were down there talking to the truck driver, I guess. But anyhow, we got in the ambulance and we went to the hospital in Clarksville, Tennessee. And my heart was moaning. He was in a lot of pain. And when we went in there, my hawk had his Navy uniform on, so they wouldn't even look at him. They wouldn't even give him a shot of morphine. And I said, you know, I'll be happy to pay for anything they do. I have the money. They said, no, he's in the service. You have to take him to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I said to the ambulance driver, that's a long way off. And I said, he might die or something on the way. Might bleed to death because I'm not sure that I got that tourniquet on there good. And he said, well, lady, I hate to tell you this, but I have seen him bleed to death. But anyhow, he took us to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I left my heart there. And then I went to a hotel. And the doctor kept calling me, and he said he was going to operate and all that. And the doctor told me that, he said, you look like you might have a concussion. If you start to have a headache or something, you better come back in. But he told me he would operate, and he thought he could fix his arm. And then he called me, and I was going to stay till my heart got out of the hospital, but I was kind of getting in bad shape, and the doctor said I better go home. So we had to go over and take all the stuff out of the car, and oh my goodness, the car was out in the parking lot, and so it was about a block to walk from the back of the lot to the front, and I got the carriage out of the trailer, and I put Maureen in the carriage. Then I got the bicycle, Wayne's bicycle, and I sat him on that, and I said, now, you stay here, Mama, you'll be right back. And I'd go back and forth, and finally I said to them, can't you get someone to help me? Because I had all my Hawk's things, and oh, what a mess. So they did, and they got this biggest black man I've ever seen, and they wanted to unload the trailer. And I gave away a lot of the stuff, but the rest I had sent home. I had the television sent home, and the washer and dryer, and the rest I guess I gave away. And gosh, when I got to Boston, we plugged the television in, RCA, and off it went. And then we had to get to the airport. Well, I asked him how I was going to get there. We had to get to Nashville, Tennessee for the airport. And by this time I was getting real stiff. I couldn't lift my legs up to get on a bus. They said that was the only way I could get to Nashville. So I said to the man, gee, don't you have anybody working for you that I could pay? So he finally said, well, I'll call the salesman and his wife and see if they'll drive you. And so he did. And I paid them quite a price to drive me up there. And we were supposed to get a direct flight, but wouldn't you know, when I told him I had been in an accident and everything. We got to Chicago. I had to get off the plane and get a transfer, but at the plane I had to get wouldn't leave until the next morning. So we spent the night in the pilot's lounge, and there were 2 leather couches, and you know, all the stuff. I had to change the diaper and get food, the milk heated for Maureen, and oh, what a time I had. But I finally lived through it. Wayne said, Mommy was crying all the time and saying, oh, how awful this is, how awful this is. And so anyhow, we finally made it. But what else do you want me to say? No.
Well, let's see. Well, maybe something else that you know about me as a little child. You know, because Mayre would like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, you were always very outgoing and everything. And one time we lived in New Orleans, and you were down the street playing with some kids. And oh my goodness, I heard you screaming. I ran out. And here you came up without a stitch of clothes on you. You had sat down in a bed of red ants, and they were all over you, and the lady had pulled off your clothes, and you came running home. And I had we brushed them all off you, and I put medication on you.
You put me in a bath of gasoline or something, didn't you?
What?
You put me in a tub of gasoline.
Oh, no, I don't
Something,
remember
yeah.
what I did then, but the neighbors told me what to do. And I did that. I don't know, mineral spirits I used on you or something. And I washed you down with that. And then Maureen had beautiful, beautiful hair. And one day she wanted to go play with Linda. I can't think.
Abalone?
Abalone, yeah, who lived right next door. And she often gone over there to play, so I said, okay. So she went over, and after a while, she came home, and I didn't know what was the matter with her. Her hair was all soaking wet and everything. And I said, oh my God, what has happened? Well, evidently Linda got the scissors and had cut off every one of Maureen's beautiful curls, because she had straight hair. And the doctor's little girl in the corner had nice curly hair. And I guess Linda was a little jealous of all the curly hair. And the people were painting my house, the painters were outside. And they said, oh my God, I'd kill that little girl if it were me. And I said, well, what can we do now? It's too late. But it took, her beautiful hair, and she cut it all over, and it was like a boy's haircut. She cut off every one of her ringlets. And I was just sick. But
How were we behaved as a child?
oh, my children, I guess God really blessed me, because when I lived in New Orleans, I was having a lot of back problems, and I was in a great deal of pain. And
They made you wear a brick and a long rope.
oh, well, I had to, this doctor told Paul, he says, if you don't do something for your wife, she's gonna have to go to the hospital and stay in traction for a year. So he told Paul to put some bricks under the bed and elevate the foot of the bed. And then he told him to tie some bricks on my shoe. So Paul drilled a hole through my shoe and put some string and some bricks. And at night I used to sleep like that, and during the daytime when the children had a nap. And then in the meantime, I had to go take diathermy treatments, I think they called them. So I drove over to the hospital, and I take the 3 children, and I bring some books and some crayons or something, and I sit them on a chair while I took my treatment, and they watch me, I'd get up on the table. But they were so good and so well behaved. They didn't get off the chairs and run around or do anything. They were really wonderful children. And everybody, used to tell me how well behaved they were. I could take them anywhere. And when Paul was out at sea, people used to invite me and the 3 children over, and I'd say, why do you want to have us over, And they said, because your children are so well behaved, we know that when they leave, my house is going to be just like when they came in. And they really were. I'd always, take a little something for them to do. And they weren't rowdy, and they weren't nosy. They didn't go poking around. And that's my in-laws said, my goodness, your children are so great. When the Gilmets come here, they want to pull open the drawers. You got any candy? You got this? And she said, your children never do that. And even when we come to visit, they never snoop in the, in the suitcases to see if we got gifts or anything. They just stand back and behave. And everybody, I was never ashamed to take you anywhere, because everybody was so good, and you were all very loving and kind children. Now what else do
And
you
what
want to
about
say?
the time that you had